Do you see any checks on your power on the world stage? Is there anything that could stop you if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's one thing. My own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop. And,
Not international
and that's
law.
very good. I don't need international law. I'm not looking to hurt people.
Do you feel your administration needs to abide by international law on the global stage?
Yeah, I do. I do. But it depends what your definition of international law is. You mean in Greenland?
That's
because you needed them
start
at the time.
in the 1951 agreement, though. It says the United States can reopen these bases anytime you want. You can send as many troops as you want, and you haven't done it. How come?
Because I want to do it properly.
And properly means own it?
Really, it is. To me, it's ownership. Ownership is very important,
Why is ownership important here?
because that's what I feel is psychologically needed for success. I think that ownership gives you a thing that you can't do, whether you're talking about a lease or a treaty. Ownership gives you things and elements that you can't get from just signing a document that you can have a base.
The verses that came to my mind as I thought about the statement that Donald Trump made in that interview, Judges 17:6 says this, "In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes." Then at the end of the book of Judges, it repeats that statement, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes." Why is it that they thought they were doing right? Because they were not doing right according to God's law that God had given to Israel at Mount Sinai. They were doing what was right according to their own morality, their own sense of right and wrong. In the midst of those two verses, you have chapters like Judges 19. There was a sodomite riot. A concubine was given to this sodomite gang. She was abused all night. And the Levite found his concubine dead on the threshold, with her hands on the threshold in the morning. And of course, he cuts her into 12 pieces and sends her throughout the nation of Israel. And there's an interesting statement at the end of verse 30. Judges 19:30 says, "And it was so that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day." Listen to this statement. "Consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds." The problem we have today is that globally we have rulers that are making decisions, they're doing things based on their own sense of morality. Donald Trump is not acting according to constitutional law. He doesn't need international law, he said. Let alone, he does not need biblical law. What I think is significant is that after that statement in Judges, we have 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel demands a king. When God gave his law to Israel in Deuteronomy, God understood that they would demand a king someday, to be like the other nations. So in that context, in Deuteronomy, God gave certain commands that were specifically mentioned for the king. You see, even when God permitted them to have a king, he established a law, a standard of law that those kings were supposed to abide by. So when you think about not multiplying horses, not multiplying wives, very few, if any, very few of those kings in Israel actually followed God's law and placed themselves under God's law. I remind you also that Israel was established as a theocracy, rule under God. So everyone should not have been doing what was right in their own eyes. They should have been submitting themselves to the law of God. I want for us to consider some consequences that come from rulers acting upon their own sense of morality. First of all, I believe we end up with all kinds of corruption. We have perversion, and then cover up and denial of those things. Two examples that are obvious, I believe, are, first of all, Donald Trump and also Benjamin Netanyahu. The Epstein file scandal related to Donald Trump's administration, I believe, is a key point. I want you to catch a statement that Pam Bondi made to Ted Lieu when she was asked about Donald Trump being with girls and as far as what is referenced in the Epstein files.
Last July, you closed the case on Epstein's abusers. The July 2025 memo from your Department of Justice stated, quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties." These two photos, please put the photos back up. These two photos staring you in the face are evidence of a crime and more than enough evidence to predicate an investigation against former Prince Andrew. So I ask you, Attorney General Pam Bondi, why did you shut down this investigation last July, and why have you not prosecuted former Prince Andrew?
I don't believe you asked Merrick Garland these questions when he was Attorney General and set before.
I agree with you.
You twice.
I've been claiming my time. I agree with you. I agree with you. During the Biden administration, I called for people looking at Epstein files. Merrick Garland dropped the ball, as did Attorney General Bill Barr, as did Alex Acosta, a whole string of failures. But you are in charge. You have the power to change things, to hold these men accountable, and you're doing the opposite. You're protecting them. So I want to move on to another man.
Can I answer
Donald
that,
Trump.
though?
I want to move on to another
Can I
question.
answer your question about protecting
You
Prince
answered the
Andrew?
question.
You're saying no. I love this.
I want to discuss another man, Donald Trump, who is all over the Epstein files. Like former Prince Andrew, Donald Trump attended various parties with Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that. This has been the most transparent presidency. He's the one that asked that those files.
I'm reclaiming my time.
This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. She accuses Ted Lieu of detracting from the truth. Detracting from. That's exactly what she did. By avoiding the question and detracting from the question, she actually is giving obvious evidence that she's trying to cover for her boss. And I'll be honest with you, I have not had any desire to dig through these files and see what's all there. I don't need to know all of the garbage, the wickedness and depravity that is related to this case. But I want to make some observations of some things that I noticed in some headlines. First of all, Drop Site News, February 18. The report was this: the Israeli government installed and maintained the security system at Epstein apartment building. Can I remind you that Israel has been trying to distance themselves from any connection with Epstein and his possible involvement with the Mossad. This is the same apartment building that former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak stayed for stretches of time when he was in New York. Connect the dots. Slay News on March 1. Also the New American on March 5. The New American had a headline that said, Missing Epstein Files. 2023 FBI hack wiped 100 terabytes of evidence. This cover-up has been going on for years. FBI Special Agent Aaron Spivak gave a sworn statement that the FBI was breached and 100 terabytes of investigative data from the Epstein files was lost on Super Bowl Sunday 2023, while everybody was distracted with the Super Bowl. According to reports, the Epstein files, millions of pages have been released, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images of corruption and blackmail. The House Oversight Committee released 20,000 emails obtained from the Epstein estate. Many mentioned our president, Donald Trump, by name. One portion of the files indicated that Trump was mentioned 38,000 times in 5,000 documents. President Trump has continually said that he has done nothing wrong and that he didn't know of Epstein's criminal activity. Many other famous names are mentioned in these files, of course. The British royals, Zionist leaders, Bill Gates, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Howard Lutnick, the Clintons and Bushes, Les Wexner, the Rothschilds, and many more, thousands. Robert Kennedy, and also Kennedy's wife, Mary Richardson's suicide is mentioned. Mary Richardson had blown the whistle on her husband's deviant behavior and apparently committed suicide. World leaders, of course, began resigning after the 3 million file dump. And I think it's obvious to most Americans that there was a lot of corruption and deviant behavior that was taking place according to these files. And that there was a reason why the Trump administration kept saying that there was nothing to see, that there was no criminal behavior. I also want to mention this as far as corruption. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has given an appeal for pardon of his corruption charges in the nation of Israel because of the Iran war. Benjamin Netanyahu's first Iran war press meeting, after 12 days of bombing Iran, and also Lebanon, by the way, Haaretz reported, Netanyahu urges Herzog, the president of Israel, President Herzog, to end absurd circus of corruption trial, to grant his pardon request. President Trump said that President Herzog is a disgrace because he will not pardon Benjamin Netanyahu. So when you think about President Trump, of course, it's obvious that he has a hatred for Thomas Massie, who is actually speaking up for Americans. Donald Trump has insulted, in many cases, Thomas Massie. Of course, Thomas Massie has taken a strong stand for disclosure of the Epstein files. But Trump insulted Thomas Massie on his new marriage after his wife had passed away in 2024. He's he's being guided by his own morality or lack thereof. Another thing that happens when somebody is guided by their own morality is lying and deception. I believe there's a lot of lying and deception that's taking place right now in both Israel and America. Donald Trump and Vance in 2024 campaigned on no new wars. Listen to some statements from our vice president as they were campaigning in 2024.
First, Mr. Vice President, Democrats are already calling you the fraud czar. What's your reaction to that title? And then second, given
I like it.
Past skepticism of foreign adventurism, are you completely on board with the current war in Iran?
So I like fraud czar. It's certainly what we're going to do. And look, we have to do it. As the president said, this is a problem that has festered in this country for far too long, and far too few people have actually wanted to do anything about it. That's what makes this administration different, is that we actually tackle the problems the American people have been confronting. So I'm very happy about it. And look, I think that I know what you're trying to do, Phil. You're trying to drive a wedge between members of the administration, between me and the president. What the president said consistently, going back to 2015, and I agreed with him, is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We have taken this military action under the president's leadership. I think all of us, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, should pray for success and pray for the safety of our troops. That's the approach that I've taken. Make it as successful as possible.
So there's no hesitation getting her past statements with the kind of operation.
What do you mean there's no hesitation with my past statements?
Given your skepticism of foreign countryism, you were critics of the global war on terror previously.
Well, I think one big difference, Phil, is that we have a smart president, whereas in the past we've had dumb presidents. And I trust President Trump to get the job done, to do a good job for the American people, and to make sure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. Absolutely.
Our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran, right? It would be a huge distraction of resources. It would be massively expensive to our country.
If you're worried about a military draft, if you're worried about, God forbid, a world war, the best way to prevent it is to vote for Donald Trump. And I really believe that.
The most precious resource this country has is the lives of its young people who are willing to put on the uniform to keep us safe. And compare Kamala Harris. We've got a new war, a new hotspot breaking out on seemingly every continent in the world. That's because she's incompetent and doesn't know what she's doing. Donald Trump is the candidate of peace through strength, defending America, protecting the people who serve, and preventing these crazy wars from breaking out all over the country.
Donald Trump referred to stupid perpetual regime change wars. And for the last year or so, that's exactly what we have had from this same president. California U.S. Senator Hiram Johnson, who is a Republican, back in 1917 says the first casualty when war comes is truth. And I believe we're seeing a lot of that right now. John 8:44 says, "Ye of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." I also remind you of the end of those who live a lie, who depend on lies. But where are the Baptist pastors who have access to our president? Where are they? Where are the ones who are calling him to repentance because of where the Bible says a liar ends up? Revelation 21 verse 8, "But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." We're talking about somebody who's living a lie, who constantly depends on lies. Because then Revelation 22:15 says, "For without New Jerusalem are dogs and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie." So you think about all of our rulers who are governed by their own morality, who are bombing civilians, who are sending women and children and other civilians into eternity. Murderers, whosoever loveth and maketh a lie, they end up in hell. The first casualty when war comes is truth. You see, Donald Trump's own morality, Benjamin Netanyahu's own morality, other rulers' own morality guide them, not constitutional or let alone international law. Can I remind us here in the United States that our nation was established as a constitutional republic? A constitutional republic in which Congress makes declarations of war, not executive order. I want you to catch what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said after the outbreak of Iran War 2.0.
Well, we did. We notified Congress. We notified the Gang of Eight. We notified congressional leadership. There's no law that requires us to do that. The law says we have to notify them 48 hours after beginning hostilities. We've done that. I think the notification went today. But we did notify members of Congress in advance. But we can't notify 535 members of Congress. And, well, the Congress can vote on whatever they want, but there's no law that requires us to do that. And I want to say something because I see people on TV. Look, that's fine. If they want to take a war powers vote, they can do that. They've done that. They've done that a bunch of times. But people keep saying that there's no law that requires the president to have done anything with regards to this. To begin with, no presidential administration has ever accepted the War Powers Act as constitutional. Not Republican presidents, not Democratic presidents. That said, we have followed the notification at 48 hours, and we're here today. I've done more Gang of Eight briefings than I got in the 4 years that Biden was president and I was a member of the Gang of Eight. All of that said, we've complied with the law 100%. And we're going to continue to comply with it. We've done the notification, and we officially to Congress, but we did notify members of Congress. We just can't notify 535 people. That's not possible, but we did the Gang of Eight twice. I briefed them last week, and then I called them the night before the operation.
So Marco Rubio says that they did not break the law. Again, our Constitution was established with a statement that says Congress was to declare war. Another nation that our president, Donald Trump, has been bombing relentlessly is Somaliland. And so I've been wondering, why are we bombing Somaliland? So then, the Jerusalem Post, I saved an article, February 24th of this year. Here's the headline: Somaliland president to make first official Israel visit exclusive. Somaliland, a self-declared state recognized only by Israel, now seeks to deepen its ties with Jerusalem beyond diplomacy. The president of Somaliland is expected to make his first official visit to Israel at the end of March, according to two sources familiar with the matter. This is a Jerusalem news source that's telling us why we've been bombing Somaliland, to bring them into submission, the control of the nation of Israel. This is not his first time in the country of Israel. The president previously made a discreet visit to Israel during earlier diplomatic contacts that led to Israel's formal recognition of Somaliland in December 2025. Those quiet negotiations preceded the current warming of relations between the two sides. Building on these developments, Somaliland, a self-declared state recognized only by Israel, now seeks to deepen its ties with Jerusalem beyond diplomacy. Officials are interested in expanding cooperation in technology, agriculture, and innovation. Israel is widely seen as a global leader in these areas. So we've been bombing Somaliland, apparently, on behalf of Israel as well. Our rulers are guided by their own morality. Trump's invasion of Venezuela and arrest of another nation's leader in January is another example of this. RT.com, March 17th. Donald Trump was quoted as saying, "I can do anything I want with Cuba." The subtitle of that article was, "The U.S. president has claimed he may have the honor of taking the Caribbean island in some form."
Cuba is next.
Cuba.
Is Cuba, whatever you do with the military there, it seems like something, will that look more like Iran or Venezuela?
Can't tell you that. I can tell you that they're talking to us. It's a failed nation. They have no money, they have no oil, they have no nothing. They have nice land. They have nice landscape, you know. It's a beautiful island. I think Cuba, I don't know, in its own way, for tourism and everything else, it's a beautiful island. Great weather. They're not in a hurricane zone, which is nice for a change, you know. They won't be asking us for money for hurricanes every week. But I think Cuba's see the end. You know, all my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now. They were for a long time. Very violent leaders. Castro was a very violent leader. His brother's a very violent leader. Extremely violent. That's how they governed. They governed with violence. But a lot of people would like to go back.
Those comments were made on Monday from the Oval Office. And U.S. oil blockade is causing a deepening energy crisis in that nation. So Donald Trump can do whatever he wants to with Cuba because he's guided by his own morality. Donald Trump has said that our military hit Karg Island in the Persian Gulf, an island controlled by Iran. He said we hit it hard. We left the pipes. But then he makes this statement. We may drop some more bombs just for the fun of it. Just for the fun of it. We bomb other nations just for the fun of it. Why? Because he's guided by his own morality. So in relation to the current Iran war, I came across a couple of audio statements that proves that this war was not the imminent threat that they said. First of all, Benjamin Netanyahu on March 1st, I think was the date, speaking in Hebrew, of course, so that many English-speaking populations would not catch what he's said, but he had planned this war on Iran for 40 years. So when I looked that up, Benjamin Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the UN 40 years ago. He was ambassador to the UN from 1984 to 1988.
You've probably heard this line before.
Iran has never given up its quest for nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them.
That's because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 30 years, claiming Iran is close to having
nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Atomic bombs.
In 1992, as a member of parliament, Netanyahu addresses the Knesset. He says, within 3 to 5 years, we can assume that Iran will become autonomous in its ability to develop and produce a nuclear bomb. 3 years later, in his book Fighting Terrorism, he repeats the same time frame, 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fast forward to 2002. Netanyahu testifies before a U.S. congressional committee actively calling for the invasion of Iraq.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran.
The invasion happens months later. No weapons of mass destruction are found in Iraq. This is a fragment of a 2009 U.S. State Department cable released by WikiLeaks. Netanyahu tells members of Congress that Iran is 1 or 2 years away from being capable of developing nuclear weapons.
They're online.
It's 2012, and Netanyahu is holding up his infamous cartoon bomb at the UN General Assembly.
By next spring, at most by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
And now, 33 years after Netanyahu's first so-called imminent warning, Israel attacks Iran.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
That's despite the U.S. Director of National Intelligence saying Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon months earlier.
Iran lied.
But for Netanyahu,
big time.
The slogan has been the same for decades. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera.
I also came across a statement from Donald Trump back in 1980. This statement was made in relation to the 1979 hostage crisis.
When you get the respect of the other countries, then the other countries tend to do a little bit as you do, and you can create the right attitudes. The Iranian situation is a case in point. That they hold our hostages is just absolutely and totally ridiculous. That this country sits back and allows a country such as Iran to hold our hostages, to my way of thinking, is a horror. And I don't think they'd do it with other countries. I honestly don't think they'd do it with other countries.
Obviously, you're advocating that we should have gone in there with troops, etc., and brought our boys out.
I absolutely feel that, yes. I don't think there's any question, and there's no question in my mind.
I want to remind us that U.S. hostages were taken by Iran because of our intervention, along with MI6's intervention in regime changes in the nation of Iran. So I wonder if some nation produced a regime change in America. What would Americans do? How would they respond? This current Iran war actually began, of course, in 1953. So many times we as Americans have selective history or rewriting of history. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 operation overthrew a democratically elected prime minister in Iran. His crime, of course, was nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. See, here's our problem. We do not recognize borders that God has established. Can I remind you that Iran formerly was Persia, formerly was Elam. Some even call this area of the world the cradle of civilization. Some even suggest that nearby this area was where the Garden of Eden was. Elam is mentioned in Genesis chapter 14, Kedorlaomer. Persia, of course, was ruled by Cyrus the Great. The Persian Empire was established around 550 BC. So when you think about this current war that we are in, not by declaration of Congress, not by popular opinion in the United States, the U.S. and the Trump administration actually lured Iranian officials into negotiations in which America offered impossible demands, including the total disarming of the nation, leaving it defenseless. I wonder if China or Russia demanded that of us in the United States. Would we totally disarm our land, our nation? But the Iranians had agreed to many of the demands. The negotiations adjourned for a couple of days. Iran held a full meeting of their top leaders over the weekend when Israel and the United States bombed Iran. That is deception. Do we have to be reminded again where deceivers, liars, all liars end up? So this full meeting of their top leaders included the Ayatollah. Apparently that was our goal and strategy for these negotiations, to be able to get all of these top leaders of Iran together in one place so we could kill, I think it was 47 of them. These attacks even killed much of Khamenei's family. The New York Times even reported, while they were assembled together, Israel attacked them with a missile strike, and that this had been planned for months by Israel. So some would say, well, that's Israel, not the United States. Apparently, this involved U.S. intelligence in this attack, quote unquote, to take out Iran's leadership. And again, this has been planned by Netanyahu for 40 years. 40 years ago. As I was doing research for this study, I came across a paper. It was called Clean Break. I had to look this up. There were several that had mentioned this. There's a Clean Break memo back from 19 1996. The full title was A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. This was written for Benjamin Netanyahu by the United States neoconservatives, including Richard Pearl, an American political advisor, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy in Ronald Reagan's presidency. He was chairman of the Defense Policy Board under George W. Bush from 2001 to 2003, and he was an advocate for the 2003 Iraq War and the removal of Saddam Hussein. This is a statement in relation to this. It serves as a foundation for modern-day Israeli global affairs. This goes back 30 years. This was not an imminent threat from Iran. This is something that they have been planning for decades. So this clean break memo from 1996 called for regime change in Iraq, check. Syria, check. Lebanon, which is currently in operation, and Iran, currently in progress. You don't believe me? Do some research. Even Wikipedia was saying all of these things. So we've been told that this was a preemptive strike to protect America, to protect Israel. Again, our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had a statement about this preemptive strike.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Donald Trump was quoted as saying, "I got Khamenei before he got me." There have been so many that have been saying without evidence, where's the evidence? They say that this is what's happened, but where is their evidence? There is no clear evidence revealing that Iran was trying to assassinate our president. Can I remind you that our president, in his first term in office, assassinated Iranian General Soleimani? More than one Arab nation revealed that Soleimani was on a peace mission. Again, I go back to this, that by international law is a criminal activity. That is a violation of international law. But Donald Trump does not need international law. Donald Trump does not need constitutional law. He obviously does not need biblical law, he thinks, because his own morality guides his decisions. I also want to remind you that our president, who's now ordered the bombing of Iran a second time, on May 8, 2018, terminated the plan that was in place with Iran dealing with nuclear weapons before. One primary reason why I want to revisit this in this study as far as Iran is the bombing of 2 girls' schools in Iran. That elementary school that had students aged from 7 years old to 12 years old had been at that location for more than a decade, from what I've read. It was struck by a Tomahawk missile from the United States.
Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look and investigating that. Red tie in front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, I mean, it's several days on now. So is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
Someone has suggested even that there's a possibility that some of these girls were daughters of IRGC officers. A second bomb struck this school as parents arrived to the school. Why? Because their own morality guides their decisions. Just like Israel bombed hospitals, schools, churches, and mosques in Gaza, other schools and hospitals have been bombed in Iran within these first weeks of this bombing, this war that has been declared. 25 hospitals have been damaged. 9 of them are out of service. Also, it's been mentioned that the national stadium was bombed in Iran, that carpet bombing of densely populated neighborhoods have also taken place. But our Secretary of War has assured us that it's the other nation, not us, that bombs civilians.
With an issue on your first topic, an issue of such seriousness, we're not going to let reporting lead us or force our hand into indicating what happened in a particular situation, because the truth matters. So I can report that CENTCOM has designated an investigating officer to complete a command investigation. The command investigation will take as long as necessary to address all the matters surrounding this incident. And the investigating officer is from outside CENTCOM and is a general officer. But I will note to this group and to the world, there's only one entity in this conflict between us and Iran that never targets civilians. Literally never targets civilians. I look at the process that's used on dynamic strikes or on boat strikes and others. We have a very high fidelity process in that case. So we don't target, Iran does. We will investigate, we'll get to the truth, and we'll share it when we have it.
Of course, Donald Trump, our president, blamed the attack on Iran to make the United States and Israel look bad. Oh, by the way, that sounds just like the Biden administration blaming Russia for sabotaging its own pipeline in the Baltic Sea. So our stated goal of this is to liberate Iranians from an Islamic regime by killing Iranians, apparently. The purpose? To try to push Iranians into insurrection against their government. In reality, from what I've seen on some reports, those who actually are there seeing the situation and not just reporting it from a distance, that it's actually uniting their nation. Millions even gathered to mourn the death of their supreme leader. So a question I have is, because their own morality is guiding them, will desperation for a win in Iran lead to the use of an atomic bomb? I believe it appears that anything is possible when Trump and Netanyahu are following their own morality without restraint of international law, let alone biblical law. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." And I believe most Americans are able to see that this whole operation in Iran is beginning to look a lot like Iraq.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Iraq's military threat to its neighbors is greatly diminished. Most of its missiles have been destroyed. Iraq's behavior and intentions must change before our policies can change. Otherwise, we will allow the scorpion that bit us once to bite us again. To those who ask how long our determination will last, how long we will oppose Iraqi intransigence, how long we will insist that the international community's standards be met, our answer is as long as it takes.
I think Madeleine Albright summed it up very well to show us the correlation here between these two operations. So we have the death of Iranians, well over 1,000. Some say there's even more than that. On day 15, March 14th, this total was given, 18,500 injured, 6,000 civilian sites struck, by bombs, 3.2 million people displaced within Iran. So the question I keep having is this: how is this helping Iranians? Is this not going to unite them against the great Satan and the little Satan? Because their nation is being bombed, because their loved ones are dying in these attacks. Also, there's a high price for Israelis. I've attached a map on a PDF format that was posted in social media by hyper-Zionist Randy Fine. It shows all kinds of GPS markings where Iran's bombs have hit Israel. It's covered in red. Israelis are paying a huge price for their rulers acting on their own, being guided by their own morality. The Lebanese are paying a price. Americans now also are beginning to pay a price. We've heard that Marines have been dispatched, if I remember correctly, 5,000 have been sent to Iran. So that means they are planning the ground war that many former military officials say is a dead-end operation. So in case you haven't noticed this, World War III has already been started. World War III, you think about how many nations are affected.
Did you brief the president, if he starts a war of choice, that the likely result would be that Iran would strike adjacent Gulf nations and close the Strait of Hormuz? Did you brief him on those two facts that I think have been consistently the assumptions of the intelligence community?
I have not and won't divulge internal conversations. I will say that those of us within the intelligence community continue to provide the president with all of the best objective intelligence available to inform his decisions.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
And
this is the
determination.
worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the question.
It is the nature of the imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
No, you're evading a question because to provide a candid response to the committee would contradict a statement from the White House.
When I think of how many more Americans could lose their lives in these wars that do not really, truly affect America, I think of David and numbering Israel. 2 Samuel 24, verse 1 says, again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. It says, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel as a nation. 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1. And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. I want you to understand, I believe, what God is doing here because America has been under God's judgment for so long because of our wickedness, our lack of morality, our rejection of God. I believe that God has turned us over to Satan. Why was David numbering Israel? I believe he was numbering Israel for an unjust war. It was not for the defense of the nation. It was to establish a standing army. David wanted to know how strong his military would be. So what was the aftermath of that in God's judgment? As David admits that he sinned against God greatly. 70,000 men died. That was because of the pestilence. They had not even gone to war. I wonder how many Americans are going to lose their lives in these unjust wars. How many more Americans? I came across an article on Substack. It was entitled, "The Old Sacrificing the Young." And in this article, the author, Matthew Littlefield, pointed out that the old often are the ones who are sacrificing the young. And he breaks down the data based on age according to the wars that we have fought in the last 100 years or so. World War I. The German soldiers were about 29 years old. Overall, British soldiers were about 19 years old. That's World War I. World War II, 1939 to 1945. U.S. soldiers were about 26 years old in that war. Other sources note, beyond the primary one of 26 years old, other sources note that 42% of the soldiers in World War II, the United States, were under the age of 20. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, U.S. soldiers averaged about 22 years old. That was based on autopsied U.S. soldiers. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. It ranged from 22 to 23 years old for U.S. soldiers. There was a detailed analysis of more than 58,000 U.S. fatalities that put the average at 23.11 years old. 61%, though, were younger than 21. Iraq and Afghanistan, 2001 to 2011. U.S. soldiers about 26 years old. And then he contrasts the average age of political leaders. World War II, Adolf Hitler was 50. Benito Mussolini was 56. Joseph Stalin was 60. Franklin D. Roosevelt was almost 60 when he entered the U.S. into the war. Of course, it was interesting to point out that average lifespans were a bit lower at the time of World War II than they are today. In a modern context, what we're dealing with right now, leaders involved in these decisions for war are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. The Ayatollah was 86 years old when he died. Netanyahu and Donald Trump are 76 and 79, respectively. So we have the older generations sacrificing the young. And what is sickening to me as a former dispensationalist, we have Christian Zionists who are cheering on this dead-end wicked war in Iran. Are they willing to sacrifice their own children and grandchildren to Molech? By the way, Molech was a Middle Eastern god. Like Joab resisting David in the Old Testament, there are actually high-profile officials who have been resisting President Trump's decision to take America into Iran once again. Of course, big news this week was U.S. counterterror chief Joseph Kent resigning, submitting his resignation letter, stating that Israel deceived Trump into attacking Iran. One statement was made that Joseph Kent's resignation is the highest profile indictment against Israel by a sitting U.S. official in history. Let me tell you a little bit about Joseph Kent in case you've not seen this in the news or taken time to read this. He was a decorated combat veteran with 11 deployments. He was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. His wife, also a member of the U.S. military, was killed in 2019 in Syria. His statement in a war manufactured by Israel. That was a statement made in his resignation letter. In this resignation letter that he sent to President Trump, Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Another statement from this resignation letter, This echo chamber was used to deceive you into believing that Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States and that you should strike now. There was a clear path to a swift victory. This was a lie and is the same tactic the Israelis used to draw us into the disastrous Iraq war that cost our nation the lives of thousands of our best men and women. We cannot make this mistake again. Joseph Kent was a former Green Beret, former Army Ranger, and CIA analyst. But here's what's interesting. As he understood this, he lost his own wife in Syria in a war that he says was manipulated by Israel. I want you to watch. It's already happening. Watch for the attacks on Joseph Kent. One such attack that I watched was by pro-Zionist Newsmax. That so-called news reporter mocked Joseph Kent simply because he took a stand on what he believes. What I think is interesting is he already has been turned over to the FBI for investigation. And I want to make this statement because I believe it's true, that Judeo-Christian Zionism is largely to blame for much of the current world's crisis, the current world's chaos and war. Marco Rubio made a statement here recently, essentially blaming Iran for the problems that we are experiencing in our world. Iran's decisions, he said, are made by religious clerics. They have an apocalyptic perspective on the world.
Drones that they also have. They've been doing this for a very long time, and by the way, they've been doing it under sanction. You see the attacks they're conducting right now? They're attacking airports, they're attacking hotels, they're hitting not just military bases, they're attacking our embassies directly, they're attacking facilities that have nothing to do with war or with military, and that's a weakened Iran. That's in Iran despite years of sanction. Imagine a year from now, or a year and a half from now, the capabilities they would have to inflict damage on us. It's an unacceptable risk, especially in the hands of a regime that's run by radical clerics. The Ayatollah was a radical cleric. That entire regime is led by radical clerics who don't make geopolitical decisions. They make decisions on the basis of theology, their view of theology, which is an apocalyptic one. That has to be taken very seriously as well. So that was the purpose for what this operation is all about. That's what it's focused on. As the President said earlier today, it is on or ahead of schedule. I will defer to the Department of War to discuss the progress being made at a tactical level, but it was the right decision and an important decision for the safety and security of the world.
Who started this war, Islam or Judeo-Christian Zionists? Chuck Baldwin, in a recent article, said that U.S. commanders from every arm of the military have told their units that this war on Iran is anointed by Jesus, will help bring the Lord's return as part of the Battle of Armageddon. In fact, they've even emphasized and suggested that it should be as bloody as possible to bring in the Battle of Armageddon. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation, whose purpose is to ensure that all members of the military are guaranteed religious freedom. They've had more than 200 complaints from 40 different units, 30 military installations. Most of them were Christians who were objecting, not Muslims, not atheists, not Jews. This is the statement that has been made in these units and installations. The Israeli-U.S. attacks on Iran are part of God's plan, and that U.S. President Donald Trump was anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran, to cause Armageddon and mark the Lord's return to earth. So who's the one who has an apocalyptic perspective on war? The U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran will determine when Jesus Christ returns. Of course, the pre-trib rapture is going to take place, so that these Christian Zionists are going to be removed. They won't have to deal with the mess that's been made on earth. Antichrist will come to power. The rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem will take place. maybe, just maybe, an Iranian missile will strike the dome in Jerusalem. Then you have the Battle of Armageddon, Russia from the north, Asians from the east, and Egypt and Africa from the south, all coming against the Antichrist who set up his throne in Jerusalem. That's Judeo-Christian Zionism. Donald Trump is a self-declared chosen one. By the way, in a conversation about China, he made that statement in his first term as president. Donald Trump, who has a vile sense of morality, as we can clearly see all around us. Psalm 12, verse 8 says, "The wicked walk on every side when the vilest of men are exalted." So, the vilest of men are exalted today, and Donald Trump has been supposedly anointed by Jesus Christ to set in motion last days events. Here's what I believe very strongly about dispensational Zionism today. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 9 and following. "Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." So supposedly this has been announced by Paula White, an heretic, John Hagee, an heretic, Baptist Robert Jeffress, Franklin Graham, the Calvary Chapel Association pastors, Kenneth Copeland, another heretic. When will we wake up and see that it is biblical heretics, doctrinal heretics, that are pushing these wars against nations in the Middle East? When will American Christian Zionists wake up to the fact that they have been deceived? Just like Joseph Kent said, President Trump has been deceived. Christian Zionists have been deceived. They cannot even see the strong delusion that has come over them from God himself. Isaiah 66 says that God is the one who sends delusions. He's the one who chooses the delusions. They have this love for this doctrinal position, this theological position that was promoted by John Nelson Darby, C.I. Scofield, Clarence Larkin, and so many others. When will we wake up to see that everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes? Because they are guided by their own morality. I want to close with Isaiah 59. I want to emphasize a couple of places in this chapter to bring this study to a close. Verse 1, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, neither his ear heavy that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you that he will not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood." How many Christian Zionists, how many preachers in pulpits have rejoiced over the bloodshed of Muslims who have been sent into eternity without the Lord Jesus Christ? Your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies, your tongue hath muttered perverseness. None calleth for justice, nor any pleadeth for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity. Dropping down then to verse 12. "For our transgressions are multiplied before thee, and our sins testify against us. For our transgressions are with us, and as for our iniquities, we know them. In transgressing and lying against the Lord, and departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood. and judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. Yea, truth faileth, and he that departeth from evil maketh himself a prey. And the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness has sustained him. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and an helmet of salvation upon his head. And he put on the garments of vengeance for clothing, and was clad with zeal as a cloak. According to their deeds, accordingly, he will repay. Fury to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies. To the islands he will repay recompense. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. How many Christian Zionists today would say that Islam, that the Iranians are the enemy, when in reality, when we look at the spiritual condition of dispensational Zionists today, they don't truly have the desire for Muslims to be saved. They don't have a desire for those under the control of Islam to be saved. I have heard statements from independent Baptist preachers who only have derogatory things to say about Muslims. Derogatory things that I could not repeat in this message, this lesson. They have blood on their hands as they cheer on bombing campaigns in Muslim nations. I do not believe that God is blessing America because we bless Israel. God is not blessing our land. $40 trillion in debt? Deuteronomy says that that's a part of God's curse. God is not blessing America because we stand with Israel in our never-ending wars. No, God is judging America. I wonder how many thousands are going to lose their lives in our nation because so many have been deceived. So many are under strong delusion because they don't want to know the truth. Truth is fallen in the street. Truth faileth. Here's the statement, the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. I pray for American Christianity to see the truth about our true condition.